Chapter 477, Horia 12. As for who was grinding their teeth like that, there weren't many people in this world who enjoyed the sound of grinding teeth. In this respect at least, Amelia was fairly average. This meant that, like most people, she hated that sound. Amelia had tried her best to correct that person's bad habit. Because she kept grinding her teeth, Amelia had to gag her. Then when she even ended up chewing the rubber gag into pieces, Amelia gave her a beating. However, in the end, Amelia still failed to correct that person's bad habit. A figure silently glared down at Amelia. That person was Himoria, Amelia's dog. The title was meant in the literal sense of the word. Amelia truly treated Himoria like her pet dog. She had kept Himoria on a leash in her yard and took her for a walk every now and then. Amelia also had to teach Himoria how to bury her own excrement after she relieved herself outside. If Himoria didn't listen to her commands, Amelia would beat her. But it wasn't like Amelia only beat Himoria whenever the latter was disobedient. Whenever Amelia was in a bad mood, she would freely give Himoria a beating without coming up with any justifications for it. Amelia didn't just use violence to train Himoria. Whenever she was in a good mood, she would forcefully flip Himoria onto her back, scratch her belly, or pat her on the head. There were also plenty of other ways that Amelia had coddled her like a cute pet. But now, Amelia also had a fairly good sense of objectivity when it came to things like relationships. This was one of the reasons why she had always made sure to treat the Spectre with great care. It was also why she couldn't accept that the Spectre seemed to have betrayed her. However, Himoria was a different matter. Amelia had always thought that if anyone was going to betray her, it would be Himoria. As such, she had placed strong shackles on Himoria and had made sure to keep an eye on her every move. If there weren't any such shackles placed on her, Amelia was sure that this mutt would betray her no matter what. Her predictions weren't inaccurate. Himoria had indeed betrayed Amelia. After being given orders to spy on the wise Sienna, Himoria dared to swap sides and sell information on Amelia. This bitch who didn't know her place had betrayed Amelia. That was a crime that deserved death. But Amelia hadn't been able to deliver such judgment. This was because the Spectre had taken ownership of Himoria. But why had he taken Himoria under his protection? Was it a feeling of kinship over having once been treated as a pet? Or perhaps he felt some kind of sympathy for that stupid bitch? To tell the truth, the Spectre hadn't actually intended to protect Himoria. He just happened to find Himoria wandering through the back alleys of Horia and brought her with him back to the palace. However, this was enough to keep Amelia from killing Himoria. This was because Amelia took the Spectre's act of picking up Himoria on his way back as a sign that he had taken Himoria as his possession. Amelia didn't want to be punished for messing with Himoria without permission, so she suppressed the anger boiling within her and just tried to ignore Himoria. But who could have known? Amelia could never have imagined that she would actually encounter Himoria under these circumstances. Amelia recalled how she had first met Himoria as the latter writhed helplessly in a pit deep beneath the earth. A pit filled with the corpses of her fellow paladins and inquisitors. Deep within those depths, Himoria, who had had all of her limbs sliced off, had wriggled around like a bug as she drank the blood of her former comrades, barely managing to cling to life. Now their positions were completely reversed. It was Amelia who had lost her limbs and was now left crawling on the ground like a bug. The sound of grinding teeth emerged from behind that metal mask once more. Those masks, Amelia truly despised them. She would strip Himoria's masks away from her and tie a gag around her mouth instead. But each time it happened, Himoria would just find a metal plate and crumple it up with her own hands to create something similar to her mask and cover her mouth with it. Amelia knew the reason for Himoria's obsession with her masks. Her unusual teeth were proof that Himoria was a chimera made by fusing vampires and humans together. Himoria must have harbored a complex over her sharp fangs for a long time. Himoria, Amelia let out a trembling voice. Amelia couldn't give up on hope now. Not when she had come this far. Not after she had barely managed to escape that monstrous Eugene Lionheart. Was she really going to end up being bitten to death by a shitty mutt like Himoria? I was wrong. Forgive me, Amelia begged as she reached out with her trembling hand to grab onto Himoria's foot. Jerke. Once again, the sound of grinding teeth was heard coming from above her. That sound. It was a sound that seemed to directly represent all the emotions Himoria must be feeling right now. Panting for breath, Amelia crawled forward to where Himoria was standing. It's all my fault. The way that I bullied you. You should also do the same things to me, right? That must be what you want to do, isn't it? Amelia's voice stammered as her face drew closer to Himoria's feet. The leather shoe was dirty, but Amelia rubbed her face against Himoria's shoe without any hesitation. Just like what I did to you. Why you should also torment me for a long time. So please, please, Amelia trailed off, her tone pleading. Gee, Himoria just ground her teeth once more. Amelia glanced up to take a look at Himoria's face, but her expression was unreadable because half of her face was covered by the metal mask. That said, it wasn't like there was any way to tell what Himoria's mood was from her voice either. Ever since she had stepped forward to block Amelia's path, the only sound that Himoria had made was the jerry of her teeth grinding. But it seemed that Himoria wasn't afraid of showing her feelings through direct action. Bam! Himoria's shoe kicked Amelia in the face. Kaya! Letting out a short yelp of surprise, Amelia quickly rolled across the ground. Her body had grown lighter after both her legs had been chopped off, and only one arm was left, so that might have been why she was able to roll such a distance. Amelia barely managed to arrest her roll. She then tried to crawl towards Himoria once more, but the scene taking place in front of her made her unconsciously come to a halt. Himoria had bent down and was untying her shoelaces. Her metal mask only covered the lower half of her face, making the way Himoria's eyes were curling up at the corners in a smile clearly visible. She undid the tight knot, slipped her thumb behind the heel of her foot and took off her shoe. But, after taking off her sock and throwing it to the ground as well, Himoria rose up. Himoria's bare foot was now resting on top of her discarded shoe. This could only mean one thing. Amelia's body began to tremble in anger. However, there was no way for Amelia to show any resistance. Jirarke. To Amelia's ears, the noise of those grinding teeth sounded like Himoria's laughter. Laboriously crawling over, Amelia hooked her remaining arm around Himoria's ankle. Then, after slowly lowering her head, her lips touched the top of Himoria's foot. It was only then that Himoria finally said something. Amelia. Startled, Amelia raised her head. Himoria took off her mask. Her lips were curved into a bright smile. Sharp fangs glinted between her parted lips. You have to lick it, Himoria whispered with that same bright smile. Amelia immediately opened her mouth and stuck out her tongue. If it was for the sake of staying alive, she would do these kinds of acts as many times as Himoria felt was necessary. Even if she were to receive an even crueler order than this, Amelia would still obey without any hesitation. That's right. If it was for the sake of staying alive, as long as she could avoid dying. Don't worry, Himoria said as she ground her teeth. I'm not going to kill you, because I also have plenty of coddling that I want to show you. Himoria burst out in giggles at the sight of Amelia carefully licking her toes. But this was enough for now. Himoria pushed Amelia's face away with her foot as she looked up at the sky. The forces of the Liberation Army that had gotten past the city walls were slowly drawing closer. Although an overwhelmingly large army of undead was blocking their way forward, the only real purpose the undead could serve was as meat shields. However, the vassals of destruction lurking in between all the undead should still be able to launch quite effective counterattacks on the Liberation Army, though even they wouldn't last that long. This was because the commanders leading each of the Liberation Army's units were just far too strong. It couldn't be helped. Most of those commanders were knights whose names could be listed as one of the best in the entire continent. If you stay here, the enemy will kill you, Himoria stated with certainty. I'm confident I can escape, but what about you? Please, save me, Amelia begged. Fine, I'll save you, Himoria agreed with a chuckle as she picked Amelia up and draped the necromancer over her shoulder. Then without a pause she sprang into motion. Himoria didn't fly into the sky or leap across the rooftops. There was a dragon flying high in the sky, and the sky was also full of flying squadrons made up of wyverns, pegasi and griffins. Instead, Himoria ran in between the buildings. She avoided taking any of the wider roads. Currently, the skies were no longer as dark as they had been before. A dragon engulfed in light had now replaced the sun that had been hidden by dark power. However, the brighter the light, the darker the shadows. The shadows became a path for Himoria's travels. Leaping from shadow to shadow was indeed a characteristic ability of high-ranking vampires. Himoria was able to use this ability with ease, thanks to the blood that she had imbibed from Alfiro. Alfiro is dead, Himoria suddenly realized. She was able to know this because she had absorbed his blood. Just now, that ancient vampire who was connected to Himoria through their bond of blood and whose orders Himoria was forced to instinctually obey had died. At this realization, Himoria's shoulders began to tremble and shudder. She didn't feel any sorrow upon learning of Alfiro's death. Instead, Himoria actually felt great joy. Vampires were ruled by their strict hierarchy. Once a young vampire had accepted the blood of an older vampire, it would be nearly impossible for the younger vampire to rebel against the older vampire. So much so that if Alfiro had ever ordered Himoria to commit suicide, she wouldn't have been able to put up any meaningful resistance and would have been forced to take her own life. But now Alfiro was dead. With his death, Himoria had completely taken her freedom into her own hands. There was no longer anything binding her. She was free. Himoria was so overjoyed by this fact that she burst into laughter. Amelia was still draped over her shoulder and couldn't understand why Himoria was laughing like this all of a sudden. But something like that wasn't of importance to Amelia in her current situation. I need to find an opportunity to kill her, Amelia told herself. Her one remaining hand was still holding on tightly to Vladimir. She hadn't taken action yet because they weren't completely out of danger. Amelia tightened her grip on her staff. As soon as we get out of Horia, by then her dark power should have recovered. As for her severed limbs, as long as her dark power had recovered and she was able to use her black magic once more, they wouldn't be a problem. When that moment came, Amelia would be sure to repay her earlier humiliations several times over. Stupid bitch, Amelia silently cursed Himoria. A barbaric mutt who doesn't even know how to use magic. Amelia was lucky that Himoria didn't know any magic. If she did, Himoria might have placed a binding on her so that Amelia couldn't use any magic. Could the former Inquisitor have let her guard down because Amelia had lost an arm and both legs? Had Himoria really taken her to be a cripple? Amelia chewed her bottom lip in anger. Leaping from shadow to shadow, Himoria's speed was extremely fast. Before too long, the two had managed to leave the central area of Horia City. As they moved forward, the number of squadrons flying overhead gradually increased. The sound of things shaking, people shouting, and explosions going off also drew nearer. They managed to pass through the rear of the undead army that was filling the streets. They were gradually getting closer to the collapsed city walls. With each step that they took, Amelia's heart pounded nervously. So far nothing had happened to them. Even that monstrous Eugene Lionheart hadn't come after them. Could Alfiro really have managed to hold on to Eugene until now? Or perhaps that monster had just given up on pursuing her and decided to head to the palace instead? Just a little bit more, Amelia encouraged herself. They had been careful to avoid the squadrons flying in the sky so no one swooped down on them. They also didn't encounter any of the knights or wizards. Amelia thanked her good fortune. Just a little bit more. As long as they could just make it a little further, they would be able to escape the city. How much would her dark power have recovered by then? There were still a few embers left within Amelia's body, cutting off the flow of dark power. However, as long as a little more time passed, the remaining embers would soon be extinguished completely. In fact, if Amelia had to force herself to do so, she could use a spell right now. But I shouldn't, Amelia thought regretfully. If she did try and force herself to use magic, there might be after effects. So Amelia decided not to rush things. Just a little bit more, just a bit further. Himoria, who had been moving from alley to alley, suddenly leaped into the air. Amelia's eyes widened in shock as she couldn't figure out the reason for Himoria's actions. In the next instant, Himoria had leaped onto the roof of the building, and instead of continuing to move cautiously as she had been until now, Himoria began to hop from rooftop to rooftop. What are you doing? Amelia protested. Flap. Himoria's hand clamped down over Amelia's mouth. As Amelia began to twist her body in a panic, she heard Himoria whisper into her ear, "Stay still. What are you going to do if we get caught because of you?" MP. Amelia tried to mutter through Himoria's hand. "Don't worry. I've already thought of everything. An idiot like you might not be able to tell, but I can't just keep running on the ground below. Do you really think I'd be able to fool a knight's senses from such a close distance?" Himoria reminded her in a grumpy tone. Amelia stilled, then carefully turned her eyes to look down from the building at the streets below. She could see the undead army clashing against the knights all along a wide street. The Lionheart standard was waving in the wind. Riding a huge black stallion, the Lionheart Patriarch was at the forefront of the battle, spraying out flames and swinging his sword, while the Knights of the White Lion followed along behind him. It wasn't just the Lionhearts. There were also Shimuan's Violent Tide Knights, Roar's White Fangs, and the Blood Cross Knights from Uruz. In addition to these knightly orders, there were several other units waving their banners as they drove through the undead army. "It's actually safer up here," Himoria whispered, causing Amelia to nod with a gulp. And in fact, the advancing knights truly didn't pay any attention to Himoria as she leaped across the rooftops. The city walls were slowly getting closer. As they drew nearer to their escape, Himoria's speed slowed slightly. Amelia's mouth was still covered by Himoria's hand, so she could only glance sideways at Himoria's face to communicate her impatience. "Here she is," Himoria suddenly murmured as her steps came to a halt. Himoria stopped covering Amelia's mouth. Instead, she gently picked her up as if she were lifting a newborn baby, and then she lowered Amelia onto the ground. "What?" Amelia asked with a stutter. Instead of replying, Himoria just smiled down at her. And then, light sparkled as a galaxy filled with countless stars suddenly appeared on the same rooftop. All of the stars within that galaxy were orbiting around a single wizard. Amelia's thoughts came crashing to a halt. The overwhelming presence that had now appeared right in front of her eyes seemed to make every factor of Amelia Merwin's character as a wizard pale in comparison. "Good job," said the new arrival. It was Sienna Meridian. Her eyes sparkled like jewels. But all that sparkle couldn't hide a glare that was as cold as ice. Sienna tilted her head to the side as she glared down at Amelia. Facing Sienna, even Himoria was left unable to keep her head raised. The former Inquisitor immediately got down onto her knees and bowed her head. Himoria gulped before speaking cautiously, "Your promise." Sienna lifted a finger and pointed behind her. "There's nothing that I want from you. The only one I care about is this damned bitch of a black wizard." Himoria waited in silence. Sienna continued speaking. "In return for you bringing this bitch to me, all of the wizards stationed in the rear have been given orders not to attack you." "Thank you very much," Himoria sighed in relief. Himoria had run into Amelia by accident. As she carried Amelia and moved to escape the city, Himoria had sent her familiar, a bat, to deliver a message. Thanks to their prior contact in Arath, her bat had been able to get close to Sienna. Himoria's offer had been simple. "I would bring Amelia Merwin directly to you. In exchange, please spare my life." "Go," Sienna ordered. As she had just said, Sienna didn't have any interest in Himoria. She wasn't even interested in learning Himoria's name, let alone why she might have betrayed Amelia. "Thank you very much," Himoria said once more as she got to her feet. Amelia, who had been laid flat on the ground, grabbed hold of Himoria's ankle. "Why, you dare betray me?" "Me? Idiot," Himoria just sneered. Before putting her mask back on, Himoria looked down at Amelia and gave her a bright smile. "After being tortured by a bitch like you, anyone in my position would have chosen to betray you." The mask clipped back on, hiding Himoria's smile. "Jerky." After grinding her teeth in pleasure one more time, Himoria kicked off the ground in a run. Soon Himoria had sped into the distance. Seeing her only means of escaping the city getting further and further away, Amelia let out a scream and grabbed hold of Vladimir. Oh, it couldn't be. There still had to be a way out of this. Her dark power had recovered to a certain extent, which meant she was able to use some black magic. As long as she could somehow escape from here. "You," Sienna's brow furrowed in a frown. "Are you really trying to use magic in front of me?" The spell formula that Amelia had desperately been trying to construct was disintegrated. It was absurd how simple Sienna made that act seem. "Arg!" Amelia screamed as her body writhed in desperation. Listening to her scream, Sienna held her staff out. "For all the crimes that you have committed against me." Amelia tried to apologize. I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything that I've done. So please." Sienna ignored her pleas and continued, "It would just be a waste of breath for me to list each of them one by one, and besides, I happen to be extremely busy at the moment. Please." Amelia entreated pathetically. "As such, I will allow you to realize your sins and repent for them on your own," Sienna finally declared. Eugene's wishes had also been conveyed to Sienna. He wanted Amelia to die as ugly a death as was possible. As painfully as possible. Struggling for the faintest hope of survival. Despairing in her final moments. Still begging to be spared despite experiencing such pain that it would be better to die. Slowly approaching Amelia, Sienna placed one end of Frost on Amelia's head. As she struggled to avoid the staff, Amelia grabbed onto Sienna's ankle and screamed, "Spare!" Boom. Frost radiated light as Amelia's head was split open. The light disappeared from Amelia's eyes. Sienna hadn't killed her. However, Amelia's consciousness would be trapped for eons at the moment of her death. She would experience every kind of death and torture that the world could come up with. Yet even so, her body would stay alive and her mind wouldn't be able to collapse. Left in this state for Amelia, every single second would feel as long as an eternity. "You would probably prefer to be dead," Sienna commented. Amelia's split-open head was sealed back up once more. Chapter 478. The Spectre, 1. Himoria felt a sense of regret. She had wished to witness Amelia's demise firsthand. However, she wasn't about to remain in front of that perilous archwizard just because of such whims. She had heard words of mercy, but they were neither a vow nor a promise. "She might change her mind and decide to kill me," Himoria reasoned with herself. It was unlikely that the wise Sienna would decide to simply go back on her words, but one could never be too sure. So Himoria ran away without even looking back. Alfira was dead. Amelia would soon meet her end. The spectre remained, but Himoria didn't need to be too concerned with him. She knew well that the spectre had no particular interest in her. Even if Himoria were to try and escape over the walls, the spectre would impose no restrictions. The walls were getting closer. None of the wizards behind her paid any heed to Himoria, perhaps because they had heard Sienna's words. It was almost time. Himoria broke out into a broad grin behind her iron mask. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through and Himoria leaped backward with surprise. She was faced with a Pegasus with 2 pairs of wings and was wrapped in light. Himoria was once an inquisitor of Ura's, so she naturally knew the name of the Pegasus. Oh. The steed was the symbol of the Blood Cross Knights commander, Raphael the Crusader. The giant winged horse was known for being the quickest in the sky, not just in Ura's but across the entire continent. Himoria. She heard her name being called. The blood-soaked armor clattered. Raphael lifted the visor of his helmet to observe Himoria. The Crusader's young face did not match his grim and fierce eyes, and his sharp gaze caused Himoria to swallow hard. "Though the wise Sienna has agreed to let you go, I am not particularly inclined to do the same," declared Raphael. Himoria belonged to the Malficarum of the Inquisition. She was the disciple and daughter of Punisher Atterix. She was an outstanding inquisitor, and she had even garnered the nickname Guillotine Himoria from a young age for her numerous accomplishments. It had been a stroke of bad luck. Raphael thought so. If only she hadn't encountered Eugene, if only she hadn't been at the Fount of Light, and if only she hadn't obstructed the hero, then she might have met another fate. Raphael's Crusader was aimed at Himoria. "Caesar Raphael," Himoria managed to stammer. But before she could say more, a flash of light sparked from the tip of the Crusader. Himoria stepped back in surprise. She expected a piercing sensation to follow after the flash of light, but that did not come to fruition. Instead, she felt a burning sensation on her left shoulder. Himoria quickly tore the fabric that was covering her left shoulder with surprise. She saw a burning brand that looked as if it had been seared with a hot iron. "Lady Sienna said she wouldn't kill you, and I dare not contravene her wishes," muttered Raphael while sheathing his Crusader. Himoria's complexion turned pale as she caressed the brand. She knew exactly what this mark represented. Only those suspected of heresy were imprinted with this brand in Ura's. The Inquisitors of Ura's would monitor every move of those branded, and if they attempted to flee, they would be pursued to the ends of the continent and executed. "Live a quiet life as if you were dead," declared Raphael. Apollo spread his wings. "If you drink the blood of another human or commit any sin, no matter how trivial, the agents of light will seek you out to hold you accountable." Raphael's parting words were just that. He had no intention of having any further conversation with Himoria. In fact, if it hadn't been for Sienna's will, he wouldn't have simply marked her and let her escape. He would have killed her where she stood. It was impossible to escape from the brand. It would stay with the individual even if they tore off their skin or cut off their shoulder. It was similar to a curse that was etched into one's very existence. Aya! Hemoria screamed while tearing at the brand. Amelia wished to live, but she ended up trapped in a fate worse than death. Hemoria sought freedom, but she was sentenced to a lifetime of surveillance. Victor witnessed it all. He saw Kamash fall. He saw the demonic beasts of Revesta, including the Centipede Mountains, being hunted. He saw the high-ranking demons of Helmuth perish and the ranks of the undead army being broken through. The army that breached and crossed the walls was now engaging in urban warfare within the city. The remnants of the undead army left in the capital were buying time, and the subjects of destruction were fighting valiantly, but the situation wasn't looking good for them. The Liberation Army possessed many incredibly powerful individuals capable of turning the tides of battle, whereas the Spectre's forces lacked such powerful existences. Alfiro Lazet? He chose not to revel in battle. Instead, Alfiro chose to obstruct Eugene's path out of unwanted loyalty. He ended up being squashed like a mosquito. Naturally, the Spectre held no loyalty towards Amelia, Hemoria, or the others. The Spectre didn't kill Amelia because he believed her life belonged in the hands of Eugene or Sienna. He spared Hemoria not because of any benevolence but because he thought her grudge against Amelia might be useful to Eugene. In the end, everything proceeded as the Spectre wished. "He's coming," muttered the Spectre. He could see Eugene ascending from the underground tomb. With no more demons to hinder him, he would fly straight to the palace. The Spectre slowly opened his eyes. He could see warriors prostrated beneath the Sultan's throne. The warriors were those who voluntarily remained among the Sultan's guards. They were some of Naum's most skilled warriors. It wasn't only them either. A considerable number of soldiers remained in the palace. Many humans had been influenced by the overwhelming power displayed by demons and demon kings during the era of war. The soldiers and warriors remaining in the palace were no different from those in the past. They were fascinated by the Spectre's power. They had witnessed firsthand how the Spectre had brought along numerous demons and demonic beasts before effortlessly blockading the entire city. The Spectre issued them no commands. He didn't consider them useful in the slightest. In fact, he felt that their choice to stay was incredibly stupid. If they now wished to leave the city, he would not hold them back. But no one sought to flee. Instead, most were looking at the Spectre with eyes gleaming with anticipation and excitement. It was an inevitable situation. The warriors were unaware of what was taking place outside the palace. What they had seen was the seemingly endless army of undead, colossal demonic beasts, and demons whose mere presence altered the air around them. How could they ever have anticipated such a powerful force to be breached so quickly? But even if they learned the truth of the current situation, not many warriors would choose to flee. It was because of the Spectre's presence. The existence of this enigmatic being. The thought of him facing defeat was simply unimaginable. The Spectre slowly rose from the throne. Eugene Lionheart was coming. "Please. Grant us strength as well." The warriors bowed their heads and pleaded as the Spectre stood up. It wasn't only the black wizards who could form contracts with demons to gain power. Even those unable to wield any magic, warriors and knights, could form contracts with demons to obtain immense dark power. The Spectre looked at them with dull eyes. "Very well," he said. Despite being ignored multiple times, they were still begging for power. They didn't seem to even entertain the idea of fleeing. In that case, there was only one way to use them. The Spectre's hand reached out toward the warriors. He didn't want any disturbances. That was his thought. Eugene Lionheart was coming here. He wanted the battle with him to be undisturbed. If possible, he wished for a one-on-one fight. That was why he brought the demonic beasts and vassals from Revesta. But the battlefield was being pushed back continuously. Still, due to the large size of the capital, it would take a considerable amount of time for the enemy forces to reach the palace. Ideally, he wanted to prevent them from approaching the palace altogether. Thus, he decided to strengthen and reinforce his forces. Gray power swirled about him and poured out. It was the essence of pure destruction. Only the Spectre, who had become an incarnation of destruction, could extract such power. Gasp. The warriors were momentarily terrified by the incoming dark power. Instinctively, they knew that contact with it would forever change them, transforming them into something utterly non-human. Faced with such a sensation, a few tried to flee instinctively, having no grand resolve. However, the specter did not allow them to flee. If they truly wanted to escape, they should have done so long before. He could no longer respect their choice to flee. Power, the specter murmured. The sticky power engulfed all the warriors. Figures could be seen vainly struggling inside the gray mass. Crack crunch. The human forms disintegrated. A single body split into several, and dark power coagulated to form new bodies. The scene resembled a single body being used as nourishment to give birth to entirely different beings. Flesh swelled. Several bones multiplied to dozens and reorganized themselves. Monsters of different visuals were born from one human body. These were not demonic beasts nor demons. The specter knew what they were. Nur, he said internally. In Lehanjar, the Great Hammer Canyon, he saw such creatures. They were the same as the monsters that Molan was killing. They were the true vassals of destruction. Dozens of warriors transformed into hundreds of Nur. Prek. The sudden proliferation of large Nur caused the palace walls and roof to collapse. Amidst the debris, the specter extended his hand upwards with a bitter smile. The swirling dark power spread in all directions. The power drawn and dispersed by the specter flowed into the soldiers stationed in the palace. Hundreds of them, unknowingly, would become thousands of monsters. This would be enough to buy ample time. Having finished the preparations, the specter sat back on the throne. Pooh! Roars echoed from all sides as the Nur screamed. But the Nur that were standing before the specter with their massive forms hunched respectfully bowed their heads. The specter did not command the Nur with words. A mere flick of his finger was enough. The crouching Nur shrieked before rushing out of the palace. All the Nur leaped over the walls and started running towards the battlefield in the city, acting on their only instinct. It's quiet now, the specter realized. He hadn't expected them to grow so large, nor had he anticipated that one human could become several monsters. Everything had gone beyond his expectations, and as a result, the palace had crumbled. The ceiling, the walls, everything was gone. The only thing that remained was the throne the specter sat on. He chuckled and looked up at the sky. The high heavens. He could see a dragon shining like the sun. It was incredibly bright, as if it were carrying thousands of clerics. But the light didn't dazzle the specter too much. It simply didn't seem that bright to him. However, the light slicing through the sky and approaching his location felt a bit dazzling. The actual light wasn't of holy power but of black flames burning fiercely. The light that seemed to scratch the eyes was sharp and clear. "You're here," the specter muttered. A black comet crashed into the ground. Despite the noisy flight, there was no sound upon landing. Eugene landed on the ground naturally, as if he had always been standing there. What should he say? Eugene pondered this for a moment. "What have you done?" That was the first question that popped up in his mind. He saw monsters pouring out of the castle while flying. He saw monsters of different shapes and sizes. He recognized the monsters as the Nur, the very same as he remembered from his memories as Agaroth and the ones he saw in Lehanjar. Why were the Nur here? It wasn't hard to connect the dots. The Nur were the vassals of destruction. Perhaps the incarnation of destruction had the power to summon the Nur. Summoned? Had he really summoned them? He could no longer feel any signs of human presence despite having sensed them until just now. Had they all died? Did he kill them? Or... Eugene dismissed all the questions that popped into his mind. What he needed to do with the specter wasn't to ask questions and get answers. Prominence blazed fiercely. Should I use ignition first? Thoughts about the battle filled the void in his mind. With my current strength, I can sustain ignition for about 15 minutes. Can I kill him within that time? There would surely be a backlash when ignition ended. As such, Eugene needed to kill him by then. He thought it impossible. He needed to save ignition for a moment when he could definitely kill the specter. I can wield the divine sword 3 times. Whether it's the first or last, there's no difference in power. If that's the case, it would be the perfect time to draw the sword when the specter least expected it. Eugene would get to see how much it would affect him and how much it could cut through. Eugene's right hand moved to his chest. Ignition. The specter wondered in surprise. He thought it typical of Hamel not to start a conversation. But using ignition right off the bat didn't seem like Hamel. The specter didn't know about the divine sword. Therefore, he couldn't predict what Eugene was about to do. Hand on the chest. What else could there be other than ignition which caused the core to go berserk? The specter felt rather puzzled. At the same time, a crimson light started to pour out from Eugene's chest. Chapter 479. The Spectre, 2. Bonus image. High in the sky above the clouds, where oxygen was scarce and one could see the entire continent and oceans, was an impossible place for life to exist. Yet there floated Giabella face, buoyant and serene. There was only one reason why Giabella left Giabella Park and was now hovering so high in the sky: to witness the war unfolding in Nahama. She had the opportunity to be an observer during the Iris subjugation plan in Shimuan's Sea by borrowing Princess Scalia's body. But it was different this time around. If she really wanted to, she could surely find a way to watch from the center of the battlefield, but it's become somewhat burdensome now, Noir murmured while swirling her wine glass. She had not felt any burden when she secretly joined the Iris subjugation force. She found neither the members of the subjugation nor even Iris herself of any significance. But that was no longer the situation. Not much time had passed, yet the humans had grown much stronger. The humans who had participated in the Iris subjugation plan, including Carmen Lionheart and Ordis Hyman, had grown significantly stronger compared to a year ago. Moreover, there were other existences present in the battlefield below that she was wary of. The Death Knight. The Death Knight was donning an ill-fitting mask and acting like a demon king without actually being one. Noir would not be siding with anyone on the battlefield, so there was always a possibility of being targeted and attacked by any and all. Hence she chose to stay at these dizzying heights and avoided any direct involvement. It would be difficult, almost impossible, for others to even distinguish between cities from this height. But for Noir it posed no problem. The high-performance lenses of Giabella face, combined with her dark power, allowed for a clear, comfortable and threat-free observation. I thought my eyes were deceiving me. A voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. The screen in front of her shifted. Outside Giabella face, against the pitch-black sky, stood Gavid Lindman. Noir's eyes widened in surprise, and then she suddenly burst into laughter. "And what brings the Grand Duke of Helmuth up here?" questioned Noir. "I could ask the same. What are you doing here?" Gavid countered. "I couldn't miss such an entertaining spectacle." "Aren't you here for the same reason?" Noir asked with a mischievous smile. Gavid frowned and shook his head. "I am not here for fun like you," he retorted. "Then?" Noir asked, her gaze sharpened. "Are you here to see how strong your enemy is?" The answer to her question was blatantly obvious. "Enemy, is it?" Gavid let out a bitter laugh, then gave a shrug. He had no intention of denying it or boasting. After all, he was facing Noir Giabella, the queen of the night demons. Regardless of their equal status as dukes, Gavid respected her incredible power. "It turned out that way before I knew it," he admitted. "Do you feel that you should have killed him earlier? Are you having some sort of regret?" she inquired. "If I said no, it would be a lie. What I overlooked was that the growth of the human race was much faster than I anticipated," answered Gavid. It wasn't just Eugene Lionheart either. All the humans he saw at the night march had grown much stronger. It was as if one human had become a stepping stone that propelled the entire species forward. A turning point, perhaps, Gavid mused. Eugene hadn't explicitly taught anyone anything special. It was just that those who knew Eugene and those who had been involved in incidents with him were unwittingly drawn to him, even without them realizing it. Eugene Lionheart wasn't just strong on his own. Even the Liberation Army had gathered voluntarily. Most people connected to Eugene looked forward to what would come next. They wanted to fight alongside him again in the future instead of falling into despair by comparing themselves to him. And that was what made it dangerous. Gavid silently gazed down at the earth. The human nightly orders had been insignificant when he saw them at the night march. The leaders had been exceptional, but their excellence still fell within human limits. But now and in the future that would no longer be the case. The experience of war changed both demons and humans alike. It wasn't just the knights but the wizards as well. Were they influenced by Sienna Meridian? Gavid clicked his tongue as he observed Sienna. He could feel the swirling mana around her and the laws born and enforced by her will. Even with his limited knowledge of magic, Gavid could feel that Sienna's current state was something not permitted to humans. And then there was Melkith Alhaya. Among the demons of Helmuth, were there any who could stop her advance alone? It wasn't just the knights, warriors and wizards, but even the priests had shown tremendous growth. They were ancient adversaries of demons and Gavid thought they would be a significant threat in the future. In his honest opinion, the power of priests and holy knights seemed greater now than even when the faithful Anis lived 300 years ago. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this era was possibly the golden age for priests. He could not fathom why the Dragon Duchess, the daughter of Raizakia, was acting as a mount for the priests. However, her figure was shining so brightly with dozens of priests and the saint on her back that it was entirely possible to mistake her dragon form for an artificial sun. Troublesome, Gavid muttered with a short sigh while shaking his head. He had two primary problems. One, he could join the battlefield right now to eliminate future threats in advance. He could eliminate Melkith el-Haya and the other archwizards, as well as the leaders of each knightly order. Dealing with them right now would likely reduce their forces by more than half. That was a concern befitting his position as the Duke of Helmuth. To him, all the humans fighting below were enemies of Helmuth. As a duke, Gavid wanted to eliminate them before they became a definitive threat to Helmuth. The other issue he was agonizing over wasn't as the Duke of Helmuth but rather as the Blade of Incarceration. Essentially, it was a concern he had as a demon. To put it more simply, Gavid too yearned for the days of war. He wanted to meet his enemies on the battlefield. He wanted to clash with the now respectable human forces in a frontal battle. Such frontal confrontations had been rare during the war 3 centuries ago. The closest thing to a frontal confrontation was when Vermouth of Despair led his band across the Centipede Mountains. Gavid had led the Black Mist and an army of demons to meet them at the Red Plains, right before the gates of the Demon King of Incarceration's castle. That battle had been intense and enjoyable. He had longed to experience such a battle again. If you're unsure what to do, why not just follow the will of the Demon King of Incarceration? Noir whispered to Gavid with a bright smile. Gavid's dilemma ultimately came down to a simple choice: to draw his sword or not. Noir naturally hoped for the latter. She wanted Eugene to triumph in the war and for the army following Eugene to grow strong enough to threaten Babel. Noir's reasoning was clear: you will only come to me before climbing Babel. Her smile deepened as she entertained such a thought. It was all the more reason she wished for Eugene's glorious victory. For that man to shine the brightest in the world. As he stepped forward to achieve his glorious moment, to fulfill the longing he had harbored since 300 years ago, Noir was prepared to snatch away her beloved Hamel's life. She would deliver him into the depths of despair. She would extend this profound sense of loss and despondency to all who loved and followed Hamel. Ultimately, it would be Noir who monopolized Hamel in the end, and the world would crumble in the wake of Hamel's death. The mere thought of it delivered a euphoric thrill so intense that without realizing it, Noir gripped her shoulders and shivered. Yes, she had made a decision. If Gavid chose to descend right now and engage in the dull act of secretly wielding his blade, Noir would oppose him with all her might. The will of His Majesty the Demon King, muttered Gavid. Noir perceived Gavid's inner turmoil, but Gavid couldn't do the same. He was too preoccupied with his immediate concerns. Yes. In the end, Gavid let out a wry smile and nodded. The Demon King of Incarceration wished for the hero to ascend the Demon King's castle. He was worried that one day the hero would become a threat to Helmuth. But that thought in itself was distrust towards the Demon King of Incarceration. Gavid shook off the lingering doubts from his thoughts. No matter how strong the humans became, they were all but insignificant in the presence of the Demon King of Incarceration. So what if the current demons weren't strong enough to defeat the humans? It didn't matter. At the heart of Pandemonium, the capital of Helmuth, stood Babel, where the great Demon King resided. Will you not let me in? Gavid inquired after his thoughts had settled down. Oh my, what an outrageous thing to say. Are you saying you wish to be alone with me in my room right now? Noir retorted with a straight face. Gavid grimaced in response, not in jest but in genuine frustration. In fact, his expression crumpled into a frown. What on earth was this madwoman saying? Gavid refrained from asking further and immediately turned his gaze downward. Ha! He let out a quiet sigh as he peered down at the ground below. The royal palace was now overrun by the specter. Monsters poured forth like a tidal wave from the castle ruins. Even Gavid, a demon of many years, found the scene utterly alien. Humans were just humans after all. Even if they formed contracts with demons or demon kings to gain dark powers, they didn't cease to be human. That was precisely why Edmund Codrith, the former staff of Incarceration, longed to become an existence that transcended humanity. But this was different. Gavid swallowed hard involuntarily. The humans had ceased to be human after being swallowed by the specter's dark power. Several monsters were born from one human. The monsters were neither demons nor demonic beasts. So then, what were they? Gavid concluded, I'm not sure what they are, but they were dangerous. Despite the vast distance between himself and the monsters, he knew it instinctively. The creatures howling and charging forth weren't just a threat to humans but to demons alike. Although it felt somewhat ludicrous, he couldn't help but think that the unidentified monsters posed a threat to all living things. Is it possible to replicate such creatures by imbuing humans with dark power? Gavid wondered. He had not imagined the possibility of such a capability. Gavid's expression hardened at the thought. It might have been too early to judge, but there seemed to be no significant constraint on producing such monsters for the specter. Numerous creatures could be replicated just by infusing humans with dark power. In other words, the specter could produce an army composed of an endless supply of such monsters. Was this a power held by the Demon King of Destruction? Gavid was uncertain. He had lived a long life but knew very little about the Demon King of Destruction. On the other hand, Noor unknowingly clutched her chest when she witnessed the flood of monsters. What was this feeling? It was her first time seeing such a scene and such monsters, but she felt an eerie sense of familiarity. It was almost as if she had witnessed it all before. Morgiabella was powerful. Such trivial monsters posed no threat to her life. Even now, as she looked down upon them, she didn't feel her life was endangered, though she did acknowledge their threat. She was confident that even if these creatures swarmed her, she could dismiss them with a scoff and annihilate them with ease. But then why? Why did her heart feel heavy at the sight of these creatures? Heavy-hearted? This wasn't fear. Then what exactly was this emotion she was experiencing? A crackling noise seemed to echo in her mind. A scene unknown to her, something she had never seen before, was swirling in her thoughts. There were countless monsters and people she knew dying in droves. At a certain moment when she could bear it no longer, she threw herself into. This was an unfamiliar memory. Noor immediately raised her finger and plunged it into her head. Her long finger pierced through her skull and tore into her brain. There was a simple reason she chose such a drastic measure. She didn't want to recall memories unknown to her, and she didn't want such memories to transform her into someone she wasn't. But even as her fingers mashed and mixed her brain matter, the emerging memories didn't cease. Gavid could not spare any attention to her from outside Giabella's face. His gaze was locked firmly on the battlefield below. He was unable to divert his attention for even a moment. Eugene Lionheart had just descended into the royal palace. He was now confronting the specter who was seated on the throne. Black flames like wings soared upwards from his back. Eugene placed his right hand on his left chest. Gavid involuntarily held his breath as he witnessed this scene. That unique posture with his hand clutching the heart area made Gavid recall someone from 300 years ago. Extermination. Gavid breathed, but his thoughts were interrupted. A crimson light was drawn from Eugene's left chest. This light was entirely different from the technique of Hamel of extermination that Gavid had just recalled. Yet Gavid's eyes widened and he grasped the hilt of glory at his waist. Despite the immense distance, the light imprinted in his pupils was so intense it awakened his instincts. Noor had seen this light before. It was the same light that had extinguished the life of Iris, after she had transformed into the Demon King of Fury. She had been astounded when she first witnessed this light. From the unknown light, she had felt a power different from the light of the Moonlight Sword, the flames of the White Flame formula and the radiance of the Holy Sword. When Noor first saw the light, she couldn't discern its origin. It was still the same. Noor still didn't understand what the light signified. Yet for some reason, a place deep inside her memory hinted to her that this light was something that was familiar to her. She didn't want to know. She didn't wish to recall. She desperately wanted to rid herself of these unknown memories as she burrowed further into her own head. But the unknown memories continued flowing into her head. I recognize that. In the end, Noor was forced to concede. The light drawn from his chest immediately transformed into a sword. This was the divine sword of the ancient god of war Ogoroth, and the divine sword of Eugene Lionheart, who was worshipped as the hero. The distance between Eugene and the specter closed instantly as soon as Eugene unsheathed the divine sword. Similar to Sienna's absolute decree, Eugene's divine sword was imbued with an absolute rule that it couldn't be evaded. The sword made of red light approached the spectre and it penetrated closer to him. At this distance, it was impossible to evade the strike. Even if the spectre were to flee to the ends of the earth, the crimson light would transcend space and time to cleave through the fleeing spectre. The memories the spectre possessed couldn't comprehend the miracle of this sword, but the intuition he gained from becoming the incarnation of destruction allowed him to understand the absurd power of the divine sword. There was no evading the attack. This left him with only two possible actions to take, either to counter with an attack or defend against it. Can it be blocked? The spectre wondered, but he couldn't waste any time contemplating. The spectre immediately grasped his sword and attempted to block the divine sword. At the moment of impact, or rather just before that moment, the spectre came to a realization. It will break. And indeed his thoughts actualized. The sword created by the spectre couldn't withstand the divine sword. His dark power was sliced apart and dispersed. The light of the divine sword cut into the spectre's body. The spectre came upon another realization as his body was sliced, a recollection. I know this sword. Chapter 480. Flame 1. The unexpected visage of Vermouth suddenly surfaced in the spectre's mind. It wasn't the wizard from his concocted memories but rather the wizard he had witnessed firsthand in the Temple of Destruction. The hero, the god of war, the master of all, the great Vermouth. He had been so haggard and worn, far from the grand titles, chained alone in multitudes as he sat in solitude. The exact location where Vermouth sat remained unclear. Even as the incarnation of destruction, the spectre could only speculate about Vermouth's whereabouts. It was a place connected to the Temple of Destruction, perhaps where the demon king of destruction was sealed. The place had immense marks, those perhaps resembling scars or sword slashes. Although Vermouth sat right atop those marks, pinpointing the location by such traces proved challenging. The spectre questioned the nature of those traces a few times, but he never contemplated too deeply. He knew that mere pondering would not unveil any answers, and he believed Vermouth himself would never desire to be found. He wouldn't want what I'm seeking. Perhaps it would have been different for Hamel, or so the spectre had thought. However, he quickly dismissed his wandering thoughts. Instead, he pondered what he could do and searched endlessly. Who would have thought that here, in this manner, the answer to the dormant question would be found? Sword, the spectre realized. The answer came to him as the first thought he had upon seeing it in person. The markings had been scars left by a sword, the traces of the swing of a blade. It dawned on him as if it was the most natural realization. The sword that left that mark was the very one Eugene was wielding now. It was a blade not forged from metal but shaped from divine power, drawn from existence and soul. Divine sword, the spectre thought. The sword formed from dark power couldn't withstand it for even a moment. The spectre belatedly conjured up defense and amplified the dark power around him, but it proved futile. A crimson line was drawn across the spectre's form. The line writhed as if alive, rampaging, and thus, everything was destroyed. His physical form immediately disintegrated. The spectre's will could not halt the obliteration. Such was the absolute power of the divine sword. Yet even as the body vanished, the part that could be termed the spectre's soul did not perish but remained. With a roar, the rampaging wave of divine power returned to a mere line before vanishing. Eugene let out a deep breath and sheathed the divine sword. With a single swing, the spectre's entire existence was demolished. However, the spectre wasn't slain. Eugene sensed this truth instinctively. It remains, he thought. He could still swing the divine sword twice more. Could he obliterate the remaining soul with consecutive swings? Eugene wished to conclude the battle as swiftly as possible. He was especially concerned about the horde of the Nur that had escaped the castle. No, it won't end so easily, Eugene realized. He felt a chill run through him. Eugene relinquished his lingering thoughts about the divine sword. He knew that 2 more strikes from the divine sword could inflict fatal wounds on the spectre. But that wouldn't suffice. The adversary was as formidable or even more formidable than a demon king, who would possess infinite dark power. He needed to reserve the divine sword for a strike that could decisively end the battle. Eugene released the divine sword, and the divine power immediately scattered before returning to him. Prominence, the imitation of ignition through his pseudocores, was amplified with a sudden surge. Eugene was enveloped in dark flames. He quickly contemplated his options. Should I use ignition? No, not yet. It was too soon. Like the divine sword, he needed to reserve ignition for the decisive moment. For any ordinary adversary, ignition or prominence would suffice. Unfortunately, the foes Eugene resolved to eliminate were genuine monsters far beyond the realm of the ordinary. The Spectre was no exception, and Eugene had to acknowledge this fact. Despite being cleaved by the divine sword, the entity reconstituted itself effortlessly. The Spectre bore the same visage as before the slash as he quickly reformed. He even donned an identical mask. However, it wasn't that the strike had been entirely ineffective. The power of the divine sword had undoubtedly penetrated the Spectre. Getting slashed multiple times would kill me, the Spectre concluded. Simultaneously, he was riddled with another thought. The essence of the sword Eugene wielded, Eugene's true identity and Hamel's true identity were all dots that connected to a distant past. It was also related to the place where Vermouth sat, the place marked by the colossal scar. Vermouth Lionheart. So it is, the Spectre muttered almost involuntarily. He was devoid of any facial expression. He had been struck with realizations in the fleeting moment he was slashed apart. The dark power of destruction surged forth and swiftly formed into a sword. The Spectre's figure vanished. He was too swift for the eyes to follow, but Eugene was able to capture his movements using his intuition and divinity. A radiance burst from Eugene's unsheathed sword, and the brilliant light intercepted the demonic blade. The concentrated power in the holy sword stood unwavering against the demonic sword. Sir Eugene. Hamel. Voices of the two saints simultaneously resonated in his head. High above, Ramra's form shone brighter, and an immense surge of divine power flowed into Eugene. Will assist you. The saints' voices merged as one, and the holy sword shone brighter than ever. The light flowing from the sword was not merely brilliant but imbued with a force rivaling the moonlight sword. It's different from when Vermouth wielded it, Eugene thought. Vermouth too had held the holy sword 3 centuries ago. He had initially favored the holy sword and even utilized it to slay the demon king of carnage. However, the holy sword saw little use in battle after Vermouth acquired the moonlight sword. Back then, the reason was understandable. While the holy sword was formidable, the enigmatic power of the moonlight sword was overwhelmingly superior. But now, the holy sword in Eugene's grasp shone with a brilliance incomparable to when it was in Vermouth's hands 300 years ago. Was it because its power was augmented by the holy power of the saints and the priests? That was surely a part of it, but Eugene sensed that there was something more. A preference. Eugene wondered. It seemed the inscrutable god of light favored Eugene far more than Vermouth. Boom. With a loud roar, the holy sword completely overpowered the Spectre's demonic sword. Eugene's movements guided the light. The Spectre's face remained unseen behind the mask. Only his eyes were visible. They were unperturbed with a dull depth. In contrast, Eugene's eyes blazed with fervor and clear intent of slaughter, filled with emotions unbefitting the radiance of the holy sword. In that moment, Eugene and the Spectre mirrored each other's movements as if they weren't two different individuals but were standing before a mirror. Their stances with the sword were identical. Eugene's lips curled into an ugly smile. Naturally, he knew what the Spectre intended to do. The Spectre also understood what Eugene intended to do. Their swords moved in tandem and initiated a frenzy of slashes, a Jura rampage, that emitted lights of contrasting hues. The holy illumination and ominous dark energy intertwined chaotically. The clash shattered the air, and the ground vanished under the onslaught of their strikes. However, neither yielded an inch as their swords clashed with relentless fury. For a few breaths since the onset of their techniques, their movements were completely identical. However, the balance shifted in an instant. The Spectre found himself pushed back, and his demonic sword faltered significantly. Were they on equal footing? No, it was impossible. The Spectre's sword was fundamentally rooted in the techniques of the deceased Hamel from Babel. The Spectre honed his skills after being reformed with the dark power of destruction and being immersed in what felt like an eternity of agony. Becoming the incarnation of destruction granted the Spectre unparalleled intuition and insight, and his combat prowess had been enhanced significantly. His skill with the sword had astonished even Molin. Eugene, on the other hand, had lived over 20 years as Eugene Lionheart. From the moment he could wield a sword, no, even as an infant incapable of holding one, he envisioned and visualized combat. He pondered incessantly about how to engage in battle. He overcame formidable foes, but many more remained. Eugene always prepared for the worst and never neglected his training. Even when he saw nothing more to gain from wielding a sword, he persisted in swinging it. In the dark room he envisioned an ideal self, then surpassed even that. The ideal form he once deemed perfect now seemed trivial in hindsight. Therefore, Eugene's sword could never be equal to the specter's. In fact, it should never be. The specter managed to counter Eugene only due to the intuition, insight, and formidable dark power he possessed as the incarnation of destruction. But he wasn't flawless or perfect. If the specter possessed the intuition and insight of a demon king, Eugene was endowed with divinity. The war god's nature allowed Eugene to always forge the optimal battle strategy. Eugene's eyes gleamed even brighter. The specter's azure rampage crumbled. Eugene penetrated the sword's flow and severed it. Eugene's divine power flared like fire and incinerated the demonic blade completely. Eugene was enveloped in black flames and wielded the brilliant holy sword. A trail of black flames followed his strikes. Boom! The specter's demonic sword quickly reformed, and he attempted to block Eugene's strikes. But when the two swords made contact, the holy sword forcibly twisted the direction of the demonic sword's strike. Parrying, the specter thought. It was an unexpected intervention. Mere grazes, or rather the mere aftermaths of each strike, could easily obliterate a mountain. With each strike, such concentrated power was driven into the foe in a transcendent battle. Yet, before the power behind the strikes could be fully unleashed, Eugene precisely deflected the incoming attack. "I can't do that," the specter quickly conceded. His thoughts accelerated and each second passed like an eternity. Both his intuition and insight settled on the same answer, on the impending counterattack post-parry, lightning counter. That was the name of the technique. It was known to him, yet he could not react to it. Lightning counter was an attack that bordered on unsurpassable speed, and Eugene's cloak was tailor-made for this technique. Eugene took out the moonlight sword. Destruction turned to lightning and Eugene's strike pierced the specter's form. It outpaced even sound. Both individuals were emitting the power of destruction, yet the powers did not mingle. Instead, Eugene's power was met with fierce resistance upon contact. The specter knew the answer. The sword's moonlight was no longer pure. It was tainted too much. Now the sword was no longer of destruction but Eugene's. Rumbly. The thunder followed belatedly. Hundreds of beams of scattered moonlight formed a cyclone. The specter recognized this technique too. It was infinite purgatory. Countless slashes awaited him inside the cyclone, ready to tear through him. The specter's demonic sword unleashed its power while he was being sucked into the vortex. He attempted to unleash the same technique. The whirlwind of slashes generated by the dark power sought to dismantle Eugene's infinite purgatory from within. But it failed. Despite the specter's attempt at amplifying the dark power, Eugene's infinite purgatory was completed. The specter conceded his ensnared arm and leaped backward. At that exact moment, Eugene slashed upwards with the holy sword held in a reverse grip as if he had been waiting for this moment. Dragon burst. Explosions of light accompanied the attack. The specter's form was cleaved in two. Although he had somewhat anticipated such an outcome, being overpowered without a chance to retaliate brought him to a harsh realization: the gap in our mastery of techniques is too vast. The specter had evolved his techniques in their own right, but the chasm between them was immense. His body started to crumble into ash from this split, and the specter retreated while recovering. "If we fight in the same manner, I'm bound to lose," the specter concluded. Under these conditions, the specter's definitive advantage over Eugene was his eternal stamina. As the incarnation of destruction, his dark power was boundless, and his immortality surpassed even that of a demon king. Yet the specter knew, immortality isn't absolute. The current form of the holy sword could inflict damage on even the demon kings. The moonlight sword, transformed by Eugene, chipped away at the infinite dark power of a demon king. Moreover, the war gods, the hero's divine sword, could even sever a demon king's immortality. It became clear. The war god Ogroth, the stupid Hamel, and the hero Eugene Lionheart. Through several reincarnations from epochs long faded and forgotten, A legacy was passed down. All of it was to optimize the current Eugene Lionheart for the slaughter of demon kings. The current Eugene harbored more malice towards demon kings than any of his past selves, tailoring his entire being for their demise. Eugene of now could assuredly slay any demon king that ever existed and perished in the past. Insufficient, the specter declared. It didn't matter how many demon kings Eugene had killed in the past. It served no purpose. What truly mattered was being able to slay a demon king who had never been vanquished in history. He was the warden and the sinner, a demon king who had observed the cycle of fate and woven causality, causing world-ending calamities time and again. He was an anomaly far beyond the comprehension of fellow demon kings. Indeed, you are strong, the specter admitted. The disintegration of his body halted. But this level of strength won't suffice, the specter declared. He came to know many truths through his encounter with the demon king of incarceration. The detestable demon king seemed eager to experiment with the specter as a variable in the cycle of fate. I acknowledge your existence. You are unique, a being that exists only now and will not recur in the next cycle. The specter understood, albeit reluctantly and amidst confusion. Though whether this was the correct path remained uncertain to him. However, the specter yearned for an answer for Hamel. He knew all along that before this determination belonged to the demon king of incarceration, before it belonged to him, there was someone who first desired it as their will, vermouth. Still not enough. The specter's conclusion remained unchanged. If you cannot kill me if you are weaker than me, then it's only right to end this world here. The specter's aura transformed. The chaotic flux of the dark power of destruction began to move in an entirely new manner. Initially puzzled by the specter's nonsense, Eugene froze at the sight of the dark power's form. The dark power flickered like flames. Slowly the flames intensified. The energy became gray flames. Damn bastard, Eugene muttered, face twisted in disgust. The gray flames waved like a lion's mane.